Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into a philosopher whose work, frankly, should be mandatory reading for anyone who studies history, law, literature, or art, Wilhelm Dilthey.
Oh, absolutely.
If you've ever found yourself wondering how academic fields dedicated to human culture, what we call the humanities or human sciences, can possibly produce valid, objective, scientific knowledge.
Then you are wrestling with Dilthey's central project, and it is a huge problem.
It's huge.
And that's why he's often seen as challenging, almost intimidating, because he was tackling a revolutionary philosophical question in the 19th century.
Right.
How do we study people and their expressions scientifically when people are fundamentally defined by internal experience, by meaning, and by purpose, none of which can be put into a test tube?
Exactly. So the mission for this deep dive is to act as your expert guide through the architecture of his thought. We're going to extract the essential, powerful nuggets from his seminal work.
Specifically, der Aufbau der geschichtlichen Welt in den Geisteswissenschaften.
Which translates to the construction of the historical world in the human sciences. And our goal is clarity, speed, and thoroughness. We're basically trying to reverse engineer the blueprint he provided for understanding everything human.
Yeah, and we're focusing on his methodology. We'll look at how he structured the inner life using his structural psychology, how he interpreted the outer world through hermeneutics.
And how he challenged the great philosophical systems of history, like those of Hegel.
Precisely. He was trying to provide a scientific foundation for understanding human life and culture, what he called the Geisteswissenschaften, that was fundamentally different, but, and this is key, equally rigorous compared to the methods used in physics or chemistry.
And that distinction is where we had to start, what he calls the central problem. So let's establish the fundamental break Dilthey initiates, distinguishing the disciplines.
Yeah.
The natural sciences, Naturwissenschaften, and the human sciences, Geisteswissenschaften. Why couldn't Dilthey just apply the ruleless tools of, say, Newton to the study of Napoleon?
Well, the difference is inherent in the object of study. I mean, it's right there in what you're looking at. The natural sciences deal with external perception phenomena that can be counted, measured.
Stuff you could reduce to math.
Exactly. They rely heavily on hypothesis and external observation. If you study a billiard ball hitting another, you can predict the outcome with mathematical certainty based on universal laws. It's an external system.
You observe the external phenomena, you construct a law, and then you predict future external phenomena. Simple enough.
Precisely. You are building a system based on what is given to you externally. But the human sciences, they're a different beast altogether.
How so?
They study phenomena where the actual life experience, meaning intentionality, is manifested and made accessible in the outer, which is the expression.
We're studying ourselves.
We're studying ourselves, the conscious subject. We don't just observe the external action. We seek the internal reason, the motive, the meaning behind it.
That is a critical shift. I mean, it changes everything. We aren't just studying the movement of Napoleon's army. We are studying the intention behind that movement, the purpose, the values, the ambition. That internal element is what separates them.
And because of that separation, Dilthey argues that the human sciences require a totally different approach to establish validity. He combines two foundational viewpoints, the psychological and the hermeneutical.
Okay, let's start with the psychological focus. What does structural psychology achieve that, traditional psychology at the time didn't?
Well, traditional psychology often focused on isolated facts, a single emotion, a momentary perception, a desire. It was very fragmented.
A snapshot.
A snapshot, exactly. Dilthey saw this as a dead end. His structural psychology is a key contribution because it seeks the logical coherence, the Zusammenhang of inner life. It's not just a collection of feelings, it's the system of feelings, cognition, and will working together.
So if traditional psychology is like collecting individual bricks, a single memory here, a burst of joy there, Dilthey is trying to draw the structural blueprint of the whole house those bricks build.
That's an excellent analogy, yes. He argues that the goal of this structural analysis is to stabilize something firm amidst the unsteady changes of perceptions, desires, and feelings.
Because life is just a constant flux.
It's a constant flux. But our thinking, our reflection, our inner structure, it strives to impose a fixed, unified foundation upon that flow. And this internal coherence is what makes us predictable to ourselves and potentially comprehensible to others.
Okay, and that structural framework is what allows us to move to the second thread, the hermeneutical focus or interpretation. How does this connect to history and culture?
Well, if structural psychology deals with the inner coherence of the soul, hermeneutics is the method we use to access it in the external world. The foundation of the human sciences lies in the interpretation, the Auslegung of permanently fixed life expressions.
Dauernd fixierte Lebensäußerungen.
Exactly. Things like written legal codes, monumental architecture, musical scores, or works of art. These durable artifacts, they transcend the moment of their creation and allow us to connect with a past inner life.
So these fixed expressions, a poem, a law, they're like the fossils of the spirit. They are what allow the subjective inner life to become an objective subject of study.
That's it. And central to understanding these expressions, and really the entire human sciences, is a concept Dilthey elevates above all others: meaning.
Bedeutung.
What's fascinating here is that the category of meaning is established as the fundamental concept of all hermeneutics. But how does this abstract idea become a rigorous scientific category? It feels a bit fuzzy.
It does, but it's not just an abstract philosophical concept for him. Meaning is defined by Dilthey as the specific relationship that parts of life hold to the whole life course.
Okay, break that down.
Imagine your life as a long novel. The meaning of Chapter 5 is determined only when you understand how it relates to the entire plot, the character's ultimate fate, and the themes of the book. You can't know its full meaning while you're in it. So the meaning of a current event in our life depends entirely on our memory of the past and our anticipation of the future. It links past, present, and future structurally.
Precisely. Meaning determines the flow of an individual's life, and it's the core category through which we grasp the overall structure of life courses, both for an individual over time and for a community at the same time, like a cultural system.
And we recognize this meaning through memories and our possibilities for the future.
Yes, you cannot assign meaning to a current action, say, writing a single letter, without knowing the context of the whole letter you intend to send, what prompted you to write it, and the effect you hope it will achieve.
That is profound. It means that the natural sciences are concerned with causes, but the human sciences are concerned with contextual coherence, the glue of meaning. If a natural scientist measures a comet's trajectory, the meaning is irrelevant. Only the calculation of force matters. But if a historian measures the trajectory of a king's reign, the meaning, the value, the purpose is the only thing that matters, because it defines the parts relative to the whole life or the whole era.
That's the entire revolutionary core of Dilthey's project. The human sciences aim to grasp this coherence in the objective world that the spirit has realized, where values and purposes are embedded. We are trying to understand systems that are value-infused from the ground up.
Okay, so let's get mechanical for a moment and look at the engine of this framework. Dilthey's central triad: Erleben, Ausdruck, Verstehen, experience, expression, and understanding. This seems to be the entire loop of how we interact with and create the historical world.
It is the core process, and we begin internally with experience, or Erleben. This is the immediate internal reality of life, which Dilthey argues is always certain seiner selbstgewiss.
It's certain of itself.
Right. Unlike the external world, where philosophers have questioned the reality of sensory perception for millennia, the fact that you are experiencing something internally is foundational. It's unquestionable to the individual experiencing it.
This certainty is crucial. In a world increasingly skeptical of external facts, I mean, think of our modern age of information overload. Dilthey says, you can question the newspaper, you can question the law, but you cannot question the fact of your own immediate experience.
Absolutely. The natural scientist might hypothesize that our sensory reality is an illusion, but for the humanist, for the historian, the reality of the experienced inner life is the ultimate undeniable starting point. It is the basis for all knowledge in the human sphere.
Okay, so moving from that internal certainty to the outside world, we reach expression, or Ausdruck. This is the bridge.
This is the bridge. Expression is the external manifestation of inner life. It is the necessary act that lifts contents out of the sort of inaccessible depths of the soul and makes life accessible for understanding.
And an expression can be anything.
Pretty much. A word, a facial expression, a simple, purposeful action like sawing wood, or a complex work of art. These expressions are the only means by which we can move beyond the certainty of our own Erleben to grasp the Erleben of others.
And finally, we arrive at understanding, or Verstehen. This is the interpretive move. This is where we relate the external expression back to the inner life from which it originated, what he calls the path of understanding from the outside inward.
And this is where the magic happens. We interpret those fixed expressions by rooting the process in our own ability to transpose our inner experiences onto the foreign expressions we are interpreting. We use the fullness and coherence of our own past life experiences to grasp the potential experiences that must have led to that external expression.
Wait, hold on. If I'm trying to understand the motivation of a 16th century courtier, and I have to use my 21st century experiences of ambition and fear to do it, doesn't that inherently make the interpretation subjective and unreliable? How can Verstehen be objective if it relies on my personal Erleben?
That is the necessary tension. And it's a great question. Dilthey argues that while the experience is mine and the understanding is of the other, they are structurally connected. We share a common human life structure. The possibility of objective understanding relies on the fact that we are all organized by the same fundamental psychological structure, the categories of feeling, volition, and apprehension. Plus, we exist in what he calls the objective spirit, the shared common world of customs, language, and law.
So we're translating from one version of the universal human structure to another version. The historian doesn't invent the structure. They simply use their own structure as the key to unlock the others.
That's it, exactly. The historian isn't projecting random feelings. They are transposing universal human structural relations.
That clarifies it. Okay, so now let's talk about that constant flux of life again. If everything is always changing, how do we ever achieve that stability necessary for science?
This is where the function of thinking and philosophy comes in. Thinking, Dilthey argues, functions precisely to stabilize this constant fluctuation of life realities. It's always striving for something fixed and unified.
So if life is a turbulent ocean, thinking is the process of building a seawall.
Seawall, yes. It transforms the singular, contingent, and found reality into something necessary and general. And philosophy is the highest energy of self-reflection. It provides, as he says, consciousness over every consciousness and knowledge of all knowledge.
So philosophy's job is to complete this scientific reflection on life generalizing, summarizing, and providing foundations.
Yes, it addresses the ultimate problem of how thought is bound to certain forms and rules, and how inner necessity binds that thought to the given reality.
This philosophical quest for stability, it leads directly to the core definition of knowledge, Wissen. How does he define valid knowledge, distinct from just, belief or imagining?
He says knowledge differs from mere imagining or assuming by containing objective necessity. And this necessity relies on two crucial, non-negotiable moments. First, the evidence inherent in correctly executed thought processes. That's pure logic and systematic reasoning. And second, the innate awareness of reality in experience, the Erlebnis, or in external perception.
So for it to be knowledge, it has to be logically sound and profoundly anchored in experienced reality. You can't have a beautiful, flawless theory that just contradicts the lived world, and you can't rely on chaotic, unreflected experience alone.
Precisely. This is why Dilthey rejects purely theoretical systems that intellectualize reality, like certain strands of idealism. He emphasizes that knowledge is bound by inner necessity to the experienced and the given reality. It has to be grounded in the dirt of human life.
So to properly build the human sciences, we have to understand the construction materials, the inner life itself. Dilthey's structural psychology identifies three fundamental types of psychological activity, three Verhaltensweisen, that are distinct but intertwined.
Yes, these three types of activity form the structural map of the soul. First, you have objective apprehension.
That's our cognitive relationship to the world, perceiving things, judging, thinking about objects.
Right. Then you have feeling. Experiences of pleasure or displeasure, liking or disliking, satisfaction or dissatisfaction.
And third?
Third is volition. Action or striving directed toward realizing a specific purpose is Wegsetzung.
It's crucial to understand how he differentiates these, particularly feeling. He says feelings are incomparable to objective perceptions. What does he mean by that?
Well, if you compare two cognitive acts, say seeing a color and hearing a sound, they are comparable because they both relate to external objects. But feelings operate in a different domain. If I perceive an apple, I apprehend its redness and its shape. If I feel joy because I see the apple, the joy is a state of my internal being. The joy isn't comparable to the redness.
I see. It's a different category of event.
It's a different category entirely. Feeling constitutes a realm of psychological facts that are intensely personal and appear irregularly and contingently, unlike the more regular order we try to impose on objects.
It sounds like feelings are the raw, unmediated response of the self to the world.
They are. The structure of feeling involves a regression from the objects to the behavior, where the subject experiences the situation or tastes the object through the feeling itself. And these feelings have wide differences in quality and intensity, ordered along that spectrum of positive pleasure, liking, approval, and negative displeasure, disliking, disapproval.
Now, let's tackle the key distinction between feeling and volition. They feel so linked in common experience. My displeasure with the rain leads to my will to grab an umbrella. But Dilthey says they are separate behaviors. Why?
This is a subtle but really powerful point. While feeling provides the condition for volition, it's the motivation, the why, they are not simply stages of the same process.
Okay.
Dilthey argues against the idea that feelings simply transition into acts of will once they hit a certain intensity threshold.
The idea being, if they were just stages, then a really strong feeling must become an action, assuming no external blockages exist.
Precisely. And he suggests that if we look at our own inner lives, we recognize that a multitude of strong feelings actually do not transition into decisive acts of will.
That's true.
We can feel intense anger, intense desire, or intense dread without that feeling generating the executive decision, the volitional act, to change the situation. The feeling is passive, the will is active.
So the feeling is the fuel, the volition is the ignition. You can have a full tank of fuel and still choose not to turn the key.
That's a perfect way to put it. Furthermore, volition is always positive. It is the tendency toward the realization of an object or purpose. It always requires the represented possibility of realizing some inner or outer process, often involving choice, deliberation, and estimation of values and causal relations. Feeling can be purely reactive or passive. Volition is intrinsically constructive and goal-oriented.
And here's where it gets really interesting, connecting this structural psychology to a specific cultural expression, music. Dilthey uses musical understanding as a key example of how inner structure, especially feeling, is objectively externalized.
Oh, music is, for Dilthey, the highest achievement of this expressive structure. It is not an imitation of life, nor is it merely a description of emotion. Musical creation finds a crystalline, clear expression for the dark, indeterminate soul life.
It's not a double world.
It is not a double world. It is life lived entirely within the sphere of tones.
So the structure of the music is the structured expression of that inner coherence rather than just representing it. Give us the concrete example.
Well, think of Bach's cantatas, where Dilthey describes the dialogue between the trembling soul and the Savior. The composer uses specific musical structures to express distinct psychological states, or soul types, seelischen types.
Right.
The unquiet, rapid tones, the high notes, the coloraturas, these express a state of anxiety or agitation, the trembling soul. In contrast, the deep, calm, slow-moving tones combine with musical schemas of rest. These express the profound, calm, and stable presence of the Redeemer.
That's far more than just sad music or happy music. It's an architectural structure of psychological states realized in tone.
It demonstrates a fundamental structural coherence in the feeling itself. The sequence of tones is not a mechanical necessity like the billiard balls we mentioned earlier. It is a realization of aesthetic value, where freedom exists, but where that freedom leads to a feeling of so sein müssen, the necessity of being so.
It feels inevitable.
It feels inevitable, perfect, and necessary, but that necessity is aesthetic, not physical. Music, in this sense, is the ultimate illustration of how complex inner life structure can be realized in an objective, durable, external expression that others can interpret and, in a way, relive.
Okay, so we've established how Dilthey defines the structure of the inner life and how it expresses itself in these fixed forms. Now we zoom out to the collective world history and culture, which he calls the objective spirit, objective or Geist.
Right. The objective spirit is the external reality of culture. Laws, customs, religion, art, political organizations. It is the objectification of the spirit of individuals and communities. He defines it as a spiritual coherence realized, which enters the sensory world.
It's the air we breathe.
It's the air we breathe, the institutions we live under, the language we speak. It's the shared world of meaning.
And crucially, in the human sciences, the physical side of any phenomenon like the chemistry of gunpowder in a war or the printed page of the Constitution is relegated to the role of mere conditions or means.
Absolutely. The focus is always the inner life expressed through them. The historian studying the Constitution doesn't care about the molecular structure of the paper and ink. They care about the system of shared volition, purposes, and values expressed by those words.
The path of understanding always moves from the external expression back to the inner experience that produced it.
Always.
So let's discuss how the objective spirit manifests in the political realm. Dilthey analyzes the political structure of a nation, and it seems rooted in a very pragmatic, if harsh, view of human nature.
It is very pragmatic. He says a state-organized nation is a composite structure, a unity of various cooperating groups centered by the state's sovereign power, which, importantly, has no higher instance.
It's the final authority.
It's the final authority. And this political structure combines power relations and systems of purpose into a higher unity, objectifying itself in law, customs, and the organs of shared volition.
What, according to Dilthey, is the underlying drive for this structure? It can't all be sunshine and roses.
Not at all. He acknowledges the fundamental drive is often the will to power Wille zur Macht. And this manifests inwardly as the necessary relationship of dominance and obedience, and outwardly in the competition between states.
Wait, if the underlying drive is the will to power, how can this framework be the basis for human sciences? That sounds like a reductionist, almost mechanistic view of politics.
That's a fair challenge. But Dilthey is realistic, not cynical. He argues that state compulsion and internal force are necessary because the individual egoism and striving for expansion, the individual will to power, must be curbed by the collective will and its imposed constraints.
Though he's not celebrating it.
Not at all. He finds it almost strange that people complain about the brutality of state power, given that the hardest task for mankind is precisely curbing individual self-will.
So the state structure, with its systems of law and organized force, is a kind of necessary tragedy. A structure imposed to maintain coherence against the natural chaos of individual egoism.
In a sense, yes. The state, for him, represents the highest level of realized spiritual coherence in the face of inevitable individual conflict. But he is careful to note that even within this necessary compulsion, the consciousness of community and joyful participation in the political whole are experiences belonging to the highest human values. The state provides the stability and unity necessary for higher cultural expressions to flourish.
Now, how does this view of history challenge the historical philosophies that came before him? I mean, he had to directly confront thinkers like Hegel.
Oh, absolutely. Dilthey critiques the idea of interpreting history through an a priori system of reason. Hegel, for instance, intellectualized the historical world, viewing its development as the unfolding of the absolute spirit moving toward a predetermined rational goal.
So Hegel had the answer before he even looked at the evidence.
In a way, Hegel sought a universally valid foundation for the systematic human sciences in a system of reason that dictated history's direction from the outside, so to speak.
So Hegel saw history as a fixed destination programmed by pure logic, and Dilthey said, not so fast. You're imposing an abstract logical system onto the messy reality of life.
Exactly. Dilthey resists this imposition of universal laws onto the chaos of experience. He argues that the manifest meaning of history must be sought not in an external or a priori goal, but in the ever-present recurring structural relations.
The categories of life.
The categories of life, meaning, purpose, and value. For Dilthey, history is about the increasing consciousness, Bewusstheit, of the inner life and the means of its expression, not some predetermined outcome.
He also targeted the Enlightenment's view of progress. What was the flaw in the Enlightenment's approach to history?
Well, the Enlightenment often viewed history as a linear march of progress, moving from barbaric irregularity toward a rationally determined goal, whether that was Kant's moral law or, say, Schlosser's view of great centralized states.
And the fundamental flaw was?
The fundamental flaw was that they failed to give earlier stages of development their own inherent value. They judged the past solely on whether it achieved the rational goals of the present.
This is a huge point of relevance today. Dilthey is saying that the value of an age is immanent. It exists within the age itself, regardless of whether it looks primitive by our standards.
That is the core of historicism he sought to ground. Herder was a starting point for recognizing this immanence of values, that values are contained and realized within the specific epoch itself. Dilthey insisted that historical periods are structurally unified, complex wholes where a dominant tendency governs everything from values to purposes.
And the task of the historian is to grasp that unique internal coherence, not to judge it by external modern standards.
Exactly.
Okay, let's circle back to Verstehen and refine the process of interpretation, which is really the heart of the human sciences. Dilthey differentiates between the immediate daily understanding and the more complex interpretative forms.
Right. We use elemental understanding constantly. This is interpreting a single life expression, a word, a facial expression, a simple purposeful action by relating it back to a shared social and linguistic context.
We don't think about it.
We don't consciously apply logical rules when someone shrugs or says hello. It's immediate, almost an analogical inference based on probability, without conscious reflection. It's just practical social knowledge.
This is the shared software we all run.
Yeah.
But what happens when that software crashes or when the expression is much more complex?
That requires higher understanding. This is necessary when the inner distance from the expression is greater, or when contradictions arise, say, between a political leader's public statements and their private actions, or when we suspect deceit.
So you have to dig deeper.
You have to deliberately draw in other expressions or return to the whole context of the life course or the work.
And this leads us to interpretation, the art and technique of hermeneutics.
Right. Interpretation, or Auslegung, is the technical understanding of permanently fixed expressions, scripture, art, law texts. This is the foundation of fields like philology and hermeneutics, aiming for a systematic and objective grasp of meaning.
And he insists that interpretation is inherently linked with critique.
Always. We must also judge the authenticity and credibility of the document we are interpreting. You can't just take it at face value.
And interpretation leads inevitably to the hermeneutic circle. Can you explain that concept simply for the listener? It sounds a bit intimidating.
It can, but the idea is actually pretty intuitive. Imagine you're reading a 500-page historical novel. You cannot understand the full meaning of the first chapter, say the protagonist's early trauma, until you know how the story ends and what the central themes are.
Right.
But you also cannot understand the whole novel without absorbing and connecting the meaning of every single chapter. The chapter determines the whole. The plot and the whole must be presupposed to understand the part.
That sounds inherently frustrating. It's a closed loop where you need the answer to ask the question correctly.
It is the necessary tension of all humanistic study. It's not a flaw, it's the process. Interpretation is this continuous movement. Understanding the individual words relies on a pre-existing sense of the whole work or the author's mind, and the parts, in turn, ultimately determine and refine our understanding of that whole. It's how meaning is constructed.
The indeterminate meaning of individual parts is determined by the whole context.
Exactly.
We should probably mention Schleiermacher here, who added the psychological element to interpretation.
We should. Schleiermacher introduced the idea of divining the individual's specific thought and language, the attempt to understand the author better than they understood themselves.
Which sounds incredibly arrogant.
It sounds paradoxical, right? But Dilthey saw the psychological truth in it. True historical understanding requires grasping the unique, total coherence and structure of that individual life, something the person living it might not have been fully conscious of. However, and this is a big however, this process yields only historical probability, never demonstrative certainty.
That acceptance of probability is vital. The human sciences can never achieve the Newtonian certainty of the natural sciences.
Never. Historical reconstruction can achieve high historical probability regarding actions and events by analyzing sources and checking credibility, but gaining absolutely certain knowledge about the hidden motives of the actors, that remains beyond our grasp. The human element introduces necessary limits to certainty.
Finally, we have to discuss the highest form, autobiography. Self-biography. Why does Dilthey consider this act of self-reflection the pinnacle of understanding life?
Well, autobiography is the highest and most instructive form of understanding life because the person who understands the life course is identical to the person who created it. This yields a unique intimacy of understanding that no historian can ever achieve when studying another person.
It's the only time the subject and object of the Geisteswissenschaften are one and the same.
Exactly. When we reflect on our own lives, we are already shaping them into a meaningful coherence. We highlight and accentuate moments of significance, Bedeutung, while other things fall into oblivion.
We curate our own story.
We curate our own story. The individual, in the act of living and reflecting, has already performed the selection of what is meaningful. The historian's task is half completed by life itself.
So the units of meaning, the chapters of the novel, have already been organized and weighted by the protagonist.
Precisely. And so autobiography, as this process of self-reflection, remains the focal point and foundation for all historical understanding, because it allows us to transpose our own life experiences, which we know with certainty, onto the interpretation of others.
So the great historian.
The great historian is often the one who possesses the power and breadth of their own life and the energy of reflection on that life as the necessary foundation for seeing the past objectively.
Wow, so the subjective self-reflection, the intimate process of writing one's own life story, becomes the indispensable path toward objective historical knowledge of the world. It connects the certainty of the internal world with the vast, sprawling historical universe.
The single life course, in its significance, acts like one of Leibniz's monads, a small, contained universe that represents the totality of the historical universe in its unique way. We can only truly understand the vast objective spirit by starting with this deepest, most intimate self-knowledge.
So, to wrap up,
We've seen that Dilthey's project was nothing less than defining the architectural blueprint for all knowledge concerned with the human spirit. He defined the limits and the power of the human sciences. His central insight was that to understand history, law, or art, we must start not with external mechanical laws, but with the coherence of meaning, value, and purpose as lived and expressed, rising from the individual experience, the Erleben up to the objective spirit realized in culture.
he gave us a rigorous methodology for studying human expressions without stripping them of their humanity, refusing to reduce the inner world of purpose and intention to mere mechanistic causes. He achieved something foundational, a framework that allows us to find objective truth in inherently subjective material.
And he tied this framework back to a really profound observation about human nature and history. Dilthey noted that while the freedom and individual shaping of the subject increased dramatically over the course of history, the human drive for philosophical self-reflection and the secure foundation of knowledge simultaneously strengthens.
That search for fixed security amidst increasing freedom and complexity, that's a feeling that resonates powerfully today.
It really does. He spoke of it as an inescapable human tendency. He wrote that human beings, surrounded by nothing but uncertainties, we seek fixed walls that protect us, even if they restrict us. And this increasing foundation that the philosophy of self-reflection provides, rooted in our own experiences and the interpretation of cultural expressions, is an unstoppable tendency arising in the very nature of the human species.
So what does this all mean for us now? Dilthey tells us that the greatest stability we can find is rooted in our most intimate, subjective reality, our own life experience, and our subsequent ability to structure and interpret the external world of culture based on that experience. Consider this. In our age of constant information flux, technological change, and shifting social norms, when objective reality often seems elusive and interpretation seems endless, is Dilthey's structural framework, starting with the undeniable coherence of your own life, and using that as the key to unlock the meaning of the world, still the most fundamental and necessary tendency of the human species.
And if so,
how do we translate the fixed expressions of the 19th century into the volatile digital expressions of the 21st? That's a deep dive for you to continue on your own.